Have you ever witnessed the crushing weight of public humiliation, especially when inflicted upon an innocent child? The story unfolding before you explores the depths of human cruelty and the transformative power of forgiveness that can shatter even the hardest hearts. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, sometimes it takes the pure faith of a child to remind us what truly matters. That grace can bloom even in the darkest moments of shame, and that every act of kindness or cruelty sends ripples through eternity that we cannot foresee. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The automatic doors of Peterson's pharmacy whooshed open, letting in a blast of November cold that made old Mr. Peterson look up from his inventory clipboard. His jaw tightened immediately. There she was again. That little girl with the ratty teddy bear, standing just inside the entrance like she owned the place. 9 years old, if he had to guess, maybe 10, wearing that same faded dress with the embroidered flowers across the chest, a worn cardigan that had seen better decades, and that small silver cross hanging from her neck that caught the light every time she moved. "Not again," he muttered under his breath, his fingers drumming against the clipboard. 3rd time this week. The child had a name, Grace Whitmore, though he preferred not to think of her as anything more than a recurring problem. She lived at St. Timothy's Children's Home, 2 blocks away, and she had this insufferable habit of wandering into his store, never buying anything, just standing there clutching that teddy bear like it held the secrets of the universe. Grace took 3 small steps forward, her worn shoes making soft sounds against the polished floor. The teddy bear in her arms was missing an eye, its fur matted in places where tears had dried too many times to count. She glanced at the candy aisle, then at the pharmacy counter where old Mrs. Henley was waiting for her prescription, then back at Mr. Peterson. Her eyes, pale blue like winter sky, held something that made him deeply uncomfortable. Not fear, not defiance. Something else entirely. "Excuse me, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wondering if you might have any work I could do. I could sweep or organize shelves or—" "Absolutely not." The words came out sharper than he intended, but he didn't soften them. "I've told you before, this is a business, not a charity. You need to leave." Grace's fingers tightened around her bear. "I understand, sir. But I thought maybe if I could earn just a little—" "What part of no don't you understand?" Peterson's voice rose, drawing attention from the other customers. Mrs. Henley looked over with concern. 2 teenagers by the magazine rack stopped their conversation. "This is the 3rd time this week you've come begging. I don't care what sob story they've filled your head with at that orphanage. The world doesn't owe you anything." The girl's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look away. "I'm not begging, Mr. Peterson. I want to work. Sister Catherine says that honest work is—" "Sister Catherine." Peterson let out a harsh laugh. "Let me guess. She also tells you that some magical man in the sky is watching over you? That everything happens for a reason? Where was your God when your parents died, The store fell silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim their humming. Mrs. Henley gasped audibly. The teenagers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 4, she said quietly. "But God didn't abandon me. He brought me to St. Timothy's, where I have 12 brothers and sisters who love me. He brought me Sister Catherine, who teaches me to read and helps me with my nightmares. And he brought me here, to your store, though I don't understand why yet." Peterson's face turned red. This child, this nobody, was making him look like a fool in his own establishment. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out and don't come back. If I see you in here again, I'll call the police." But Grace didn't move immediately. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," she said, placing it on the counter between them. "It's a prayer I wrote, for your happiness." That was the final straw. Peterson grabbed the girl by her thin shoulder, his fingers digging in harder than necessary, and began marching her toward the door. Her teddy bear fell to the floor with a soft thud. "Out!" he shouted, pushing her through the automatic doors. "And if you come back, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Grace stumbled on the sidewalk, catching herself before she fell. She turned back, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, not for herself, but for the teddy bear still lying on the store floor. "Please," she whispered. "Please, may I have Benedict back?" "The bear stays," Peterson said coldly. "Consider it payment for all the time you've wasted." He turned to face the shocked customers. "Show's over. Get back to your shopping." But nobody moved. Mrs. Henley set down her prescription bag and walked out without a word. The teenagers left their magazines unpurchased. Within minutes, the store was empty, except for Peterson and his employees who avoided his gaze. He bent down and picked up the raggedy bear, intending to throw it in the trash. Something crinkled in its worn belly. Curious despite himself, he found a small opening in the seam and pulled out a piece of paper yellowed with age. It was a hospital bracelet. "Baby girl Whitmore," it read. "Mother, Rebecca Whitmore, deceased. Father, David Whitmore, deceased." He crumpled it up and threw it in the waste bin along with the bear. That night, Peterson lay in his empty king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling. His wife had left him 7 years ago, said he was too cold, too focused on money, too convinced that kindness was weakness. The house felt larger in the darkness, every room an echo chamber of his solitude. He reached for the remote to turn on the television, anything to fill the silence, but his hand knocked over the water glass on his nightstand. As he cleaned up the mess, he noticed the piece of paper he'd shoved in his pocket earlier, the prayer Grace had left. Against his better judgment, he unfolded it. The handwriting was careful, each letter formed with the concentration of a child who'd worked hard to make it legible. "Dear God, please help Mr. Peterson find the joy he's lost. I see it hiding behind his eyes, scared to come out. Maybe if he smiled more, his heart wouldn't hurt so much. Help him remember what it feels like to be loved. Amen. Grace." He crumpled it up and threw it across the room. The next morning brought unexpected chaos. Peterson arrived at the pharmacy to find a small crowd gathered outside, including a reporter from the local news station. Someone had filmed the incident with Grace on their phone. The video was already viral. "Heartless store manager throws out orphan child" had over 2 million views. "Mr. Peterson," the reporter thrust a microphone in his face, "how do you respond to allegations that you physically assaulted a minor and stole her property?" "That's ridiculous," he sputtered. "I barely touched her, and that filthy toy, the teddy bear that contained her deceased parents' hospital bracelet?" The reporter interrupted. "The only memento she had of them?" Peterson's blood ran cold. How did they know about the bracelet? Inside the store, his employees were fielding endless phone calls. Sarah, his assistant manager, looked up when he entered. "Corporate's on line 1. She said quietly. "They've called 3 times. The conversation with corporate was brief and brutal. Pending investigation, he was suspended without pay. The franchise was considering revoking his license. Stock prices had dropped 3% overnight due to the public relations nightmare." Peterson spent the rest of the day in his office, watching the parking lot remain unusually empty. Regular customers were shopping elsewhere. By closing time, they'd made less than $200, the worst day in the store's 12-year history. That night, unable to sleep again, Peterson found himself thinking about the prayer. He retrieved it from where he'd thrown it, smoothing out the wrinkles. Help him remember what it feels like to be loved. When was the last time someone had prayed for him? When was the last time anyone had cared enough to write down words for his benefit, expecting nothing in return? The second day dawned grey and bitter. Peterson arrived at the pharmacy to find it vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "child abuser" across the front windows. As he stood there staring at the red letters dripping like blood, his phone rang. "Mr. Peterson, this is Dr. Morrison from Mercy General. You're listed as Marcus Peterson's emergency contact? Peterson's heart stopped. Marcus was his nephew, his only family, a sophomore at the State University. What happened? Is he okay? He was in a car accident early this morning. He's stable but critical. You should come. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Peterson found himself praying for the first time in 20 years, not to any god he believed in, just throwing words into the void, begging whatever might be listening to spare Marcus. The boy looked small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires creating a web around his broken body. The doctor explained, drunk driver, head-on collision. Marcus was lucky to be alive. He'd be okay probably, but the recovery would be long and expensive. Peterson sat by the bedside holding his nephew's hand when a familiar voice made him look up. Sometimes the hardest prayers to answer are the ones we don't know we're praying. Sister Catherine stood in the doorway, an elderly nun with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She carried a small bouquet of hand-picked flowers. "What are you doing here?" Peterson asked, too exhausted to be angry. "Grace asked me to come. She heard about your nephew on the news. She wanted to make sure you weren't alone." Sister Catherine placed the flowers on the bedside table. "She also wanted me to give you this." She handed him Benedict, the teddy bear, carefully mended where it had been torn. The hospital bracelet returned to its hiding place. Where did she get it?" "One of your employees, Sarah, I believe, rescued it from the trash and brought it to St. Timothy's. She said she couldn't stand to see a child's treasure thrown away." Peterson stared at the bear, its one good eye seeming to look right through him. "After what I did to her, Grace has lost everything, Mr. Peterson. Her parents, her home, any chance at a normal childhood, but she hasn't lost her capacity to love. That's her superpower, you might say." Sister Catherine adjusted her glasses. "She wanted me to tell you that she forgives you, and that she's praying for Marcus." Peterson's throat tightened. "I don't understand." "Why would she?" "Because that's what forgiveness looks like," Sister Catherine said simply. "It's not waiting for someone to deserve it. It's giving it freely, like a gift they could never earn." After Sister Catherine left, Peterson sat in the gathering darkness of the hospital room, listening to the steady beep of Marcus's heart monitor. He thought about Grace, probably getting ready for bed at St. Timothy's, saying prayers for the man who had humiliated her, for the nephew of the man who had caused her such pain. His phone buzzed. Sarah had sent him a link to another video. This one showed Grace being interviewed by the same reporter who had ambushed him. The little girl, wearing the same dress, clutching Benedict, spoke directly to the camera. "Mr. Peterson isn't a bad man, he's just sad. Sometimes, when people are sad for too long, it turns into anger, because anger feels stronger than sadness. But it's not. Love is stronger than both. I forgive Mr. Peterson, and I hope everyone else will too. He didn't mean to hurt me. He was just protecting himself from being hurt. That's what Sister Catherine taught me. Hurt people, but loved people can learn to love people." The video had 5 million views. The comment section was flooded with people calling for others to show Peterson the same grace the little girl had shown. Grace's grace was trending. Peterson watched it 7 times, each viewing revealing something new in the child's face. A wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young, a peace that defied explanation, a love that made no sense. On the 3rd morning, Marcus woke up. His first word was, "Uncle," and Peterson wept like he hadn't wept since he was a child himself. As he helped Marcus sip water through a straw, he made a decision. 2 hours later, Peterson stood outside St. Timothy's Children's Home, his hand trembling as he rang the bell. Sister Catherine answered, unsurprised to see him. "Is Grace here?" he asked. "In the garden. She's teaching the younger children how to plant winter vegetables." He found her kneeling in the dirt, showing a boy of maybe 5 how to plant carrot seeds. Her dress was muddy, her hands covered in soil, and she was smiling like she'd won the lottery. When she saw Peterson, she stood, brushing dirt off her knees. "Mr. Peterson, is Marcus okay?" "He woke up this morning," Peterson said, his voice thick. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery. That's wonderful! Grace's face lit up with genuine joy. I knew God would take care of him. Peterson dropped to his knees in the garden dirt, not caring about his expensive slacks. Grace, I need to ask your forgiveness, not just for the other day, but for losing sight of what matters, for becoming someone who could hurt a child and feel justified about it. Grace stepped forward and put her small, dirty hand on his shoulder. I already forgave you, Mr. Peterson, the moment it happened. But how? The question came out as a broken whisper. How can you forgive so easily? Because I've been forgiven for so much more, she said simply. But when my parents died, I was so angry at God. I said terrible things. I told him I hated him, but he forgave me and kept loving me anyway. Sister Catherine says that's what grace means, getting love you don't deserve. That's why they named me Grace, you know. My parents said I was their undeserved gift. Peterson pulled out an envelope from his jacket. I want to make things right. This is a check, it's not charity. It's an investment in St. Timothy's. And I want to offer you that job you asked for. Not because I pity you, but because I think you have something to teach me. Something I forgot a long time ago. Grace hugged him then, dirt and all, her thin arms barely reaching around his shoulders. Can Benedict come to work too? She asked. Benedict can absolutely come to work. Peterson laughed through his tears. 6 months later, Peterson's pharmacy looked different. Not just the fresh paint covering the vandalism, or the new children's reading corner Grace had suggested, but something in the atmosphere itself. Peterson smiled now, actually smiled when customers entered. He knew their names, asked about their families, remembered their struggles. Grace worked there 3 afternoons a week, officially as a junior community liaison, which mostly meant she helped elderly customers find what they needed and read stories to children while their parents shopped. Her presence had transformed the place from a simple pharmacy into something resembling a community center. The day that would change everything started normally enough. Grace was organizing the children's medicine section, humming a hymn she'd learned at church, when a well-dressed woman entered the store. She looked nervous, clutching her designer purse like a shield. "Excuse me," she said to Peterson. "I'm looking for a little girl named Grace Whitmore. I was told she works here." Peterson's protective instincts kicked in. "May I ask why?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Elizabeth Whitmore Harrison. I'm her aunt. Her father, David, was my brother." Grace had appeared at the end of the aisle, Benedict under one arm, a pricing gun in the other hand. She stood frozen, staring at the woman, who looked so much like the faded photograph she kept under her pillow. "I've been searching for you for 5 years, Elizabeth continued, her voice breaking. "After the accident, there was confusion about custody, paperwork that got lost. By the time I tracked you down to St. Timothy's, my husband and I were going through a divorce, and the courts wouldn't consider placement. But now I'm settled, remarried, and if you're willing, we want you to come home with us." The pharmacy fell silent. Peterson felt his chest tighten. After all this time, Grace might actually get a real family. He should be happy for her. He was happy for her. But the thought of losing her. "Can I bring Benedict?" Grace asked in a small voice. Elizabeth laughed through her tears. "Of course. And Grace, there's something else. Your parents, they had life insurance. It's been in trust for you. It's enough for college, for whatever dreams you have." Peterson watched Grace process this information, from orphan to family, from poverty to security, in the span of a single conversation. But instead of jumping for joy, she turned to him. "Mr. Peterson, if I go live with Aunt Elizabeth, can I still work here? Can I still be your junior community liaison?" Before he could answer, she turned to Elizabeth. "And can we still support St. Timothy's? The other kids there, they're my family too. I can't just forget about them." Elizabeth knelt down to Grace's level. "Sweetheart, you can do whatever you want. We just want you to be happy." Then I want to split my time," Grace announced with the certainty only a child can possess. Weekends with you, learning about my parents and being part of a family. Weekdays at St. Timothy's because they need me. And afternoons here because Mr. Peterson is teaching me about business, and I'm teaching him about grace. Peterson found his voice. That sounds like a complicated arrangement. The best things usually are, Sister Catherine said from the doorway, having arrived to pick up Grace. But then again, grace itself is complicated, simple enough for a child to understand, complex enough to transform the hardest heart. Letter found in Peterson's desk, dated 1 year later. Dear Marcus, you asked me why I changed. What happened to the uncle you used to know? The one who cared more about profit margins than people? The simple answer is that a 9-year-old girl with a one-eyed teddy bear taught me that I had it all backwards. Grace Whitmore Harrison, she hyphenated like her aunt, still works at the pharmacy every Tuesday and Thursday. She's 11 now, taller but still carrying Benedict everywhere. She's implemented a program where elderly customers can adopt a grandchild from St. Timothy's for shopping trips. She's convinced me to hire 2 former homeless veterans. She's turned my pharmacy into something I never imagined, a place where healing happens not just through medicine, but through connection. Her aunt, Elizabeth, and her husband, Robert, have become dear friends. They invite me for Sunday dinners, where Grace insists on saying grace before meals, always ending with, "And thank you for second chances and third chances and however many chances we need." You asked what changed me. I learned that grace isn't just a religious concept or a little girl's name. It's the radical idea that we can be better than our worst moments, that forgiveness is stronger than revenge, that love really can transform everything it touches. The store is more profitable than ever, by the way. Turns out when you treat people like family, they become family. When you invest in community, community invests in you. When you choose grace over judgment, grace chooses you back. Come visit when you're on break. Grace wants to show you the new reading garden she's designing for the Children's Hospital. She says it needs a fountain, something about living water. I told her we'd have to fundraise. She just smiled and said, God will provide. And you know what? I'm starting to believe her. Your transformed uncle, Pete. P.S. I've started going to church with Grace on Sundays. Not because I suddenly have all the answers, but because I finally understand that the questions matter more when you're not asking them alone. The autumn sun slanted through the pharmacy windows, casting golden light on the prayer card that Peterson now kept laminated and visible on his register. Grace's childhood handwriting still spoke truth. Help him remember what it feels like to be loved. He had remembered. Oh, how he had remembered. Grace appeared from the storeroom, Benedict tucked under one arm, inventory clipboard in hand. A mirror image of how Peterson had looked that day 3 years ago when she first walked in. But where his face had shown irritation and coldness, hers radiated warmth. Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Chen's prescription is ready, but she's $7 short. She's trying to decide which of her medications to skip this month. Peterson didn't hesitate. Tell her there was a pricing error in her favor. Cover the difference from the Grace Fund. The Grace Fund, started with Peterson's own money, now supported by dozens of customers, ensured no one in their community went without necessary medication. It had paid for thousands of prescriptions and somehow never ran dry. You're getting soft in your old age, Sarah teased from behind the pharmacy counter. No, Peterson replied, watching Grace skip back to Mrs. Chen with the good news. I'm finally getting it right. That evening, as Peterson closed the store, he found Grace sitting in the children's corner, reading to Benedict from a picture book about forgiveness. She looked up when she heard him approach. Mr. Peterson, can I tell you a secret? Of course. Sometimes I dream about my parents. They always ask me if I'm happy, if I'm okay. And I tell them yes, because it's true. But in the last dream, they asked about you, too. They wanted to know if the sad man from the pharmacy had found his smile again. Peterson's eyes misted. What did you tell them? I told them you didn't just find your smile. You found your heart. and that you helped me understand something important. That God doesn't just use perfect people to show his love. He uses broken people who've been put back together because they understand what it's like to need grace. She stood up, gave him a quick hug, and headed for the door where Elizabeth was waiting in the car. At the threshold, she turned back. "See you Thursday, Mr. Peterson. Don't forget, we're doing the diabetes education class for the seniors." "I won't forget." "And Mr. Peterson, thank you for not giving up on love, even when love felt like it had given up on you." As the door closed behind her, Peterson stood alone in his pharmacy. Except he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by the invisible presence of every life that had been touched within these walls, every act of grace that had rippled outward like stones thrown in still water. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to the video that had started it all. Him pushing a crying child out of his store. The comment section had evolved over the years. The latest one, posted just that morning, read, "This is the most beautiful redemption story I've ever seen. That little girl didn't just forgive that man, she saved him." Peterson smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and warmed his whole face. He typed a reply. "She didn't save me. She showed me that I was worth saving. There's a difference. And that difference? That's grace." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, each flake unique and perfect, covering the ground in a blanket of white that made everything look new. Through the window, Peterson could see Grace's face pressed against the car window, her breath fogging the glass as she waved goodbye. He waved back, then turned to face his empty store. Tomorrow, it would fill again with people needing more than just medicine, needing connection, compassion, understanding, and he would be ready, thanks to a little girl who had taught him that the greatest strength wasn't in building walls around your heart, but in having the courage to tear them down. The prayer was still there on his register, Grace's words now etched not just in laminate, but in his soul. Help him remember what it feels like to be loved. He had remembered, and in remembering, he had finally learned how to love in return. The pharmacy lights dimmed as Peterson locked up, but the light that Grace had kindled in that place and in his heart would never be extinguished. It would burn on, warming everyone who entered, a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness and the miracle of second chances. In the distance, church bells rang out the evening hour, their bronze voices carrying across the snow-covered town. Peterson stood for a moment, listening, remembering another sound, the soft thud of a teddy bear hitting his pharmacy floor, and the even softer voice of a child offering him a prayer for his happiness. That prayer had been answered in ways he never could have imagined, and somewhere in the warmth of her aunt's car, driving home through the falling snow, Grace hugged Benedict closer and whispered her nightly prayer, ending as always, "Thank you for Mr. Peterson. Thank you for helping him find his way back to love." The snow continued to fall, covering the town in grace, making all things new, just like a little girl with a one-eyed bear had done for a bitter man who thought he was beyond redemption, just like love always does when we finally let it in.